Welcome, friends and comrades. I'm Jeff Mackler on this election eve socialist action discussion. I'm the candidate for president of the United States. The votes are streaming in for me. We got some votes from Idaho today and from California, East Coast, and so on. I don't think I'm going to total enough to win the election, but of course, we entered this election with no illusions. Here with me tonight is my vice presidential candidate from Salem, Oregon, and Montague, our East Coast branch organizer, Marty Goodman from New York City, Nick Brannon, the editor of our newspaper from California, and Lisa Lundberg from Minneapolis, Minnesota, a longtime social justice, immigration rights, anti-war activist. Soon to be joining us will be comrades from other cities across the country. We have two purposes tonight. The most important one for us is to explain why we don't consider it to be a serious choice between two capitalist imperialist parties. That's why we're running for president against the bipartisan war maker parties. But we do have one concern, and that is there has been an open threat by the President of the United States to steal the elections, to refuse a peaceful transition, to refuse to count the tens of millions of mail-in ballots, and in fact, to announce himself, if he sees so fit, as the winner of the election unilaterally before the mail-in ballots, which sometimes take a day or two or three or longer, are to be counted. And he said, if there are protesters in the street who disagree with his opinion, he characterizes them in advance as violent, and he proposes to call out federal troops to crush them, like he wanted to do with the Black Lives Matter protests. In our view, the right to vote, however restricted and constricted in capitalist elections, however much the field of endeavor in the elections is dominated by the capitalist parties. By the way, I may add that this particular election has registered the largest amount of money ever spent, $13.3 billion on the election, almost double the amount spent in 2016. It's a contest literally between billionaires, with Joe Biden leading the contest at 131 billionaires on his side, and poor Donald Trump is way behind with only 93. Last time I checked with our party treasurer, we didn't have any billionaires or even millionaires or even $100,000 income comrades on our side. We just have the credibility that we built by being active daily participants in every aspect of the class struggle. The struggle against US imperialist war, the struggle against COVID-19 and free healthcare, quality healthcare for everyone, free quality education from the cradle to the grave for everyone, the withdrawal of all US troops, the abolition of the trillion-dollar military budget, 100% solidarity and support for the struggles of oppressed people around the world for self-determination, and total support for the struggles of women, LGBTQI, transgender people for full democratic rights without threats of persecution, exclusion, violence, and so on. We are supporters of the Black liberation struggle in the traditions of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. We believe, as revolutionary socialists, that all the problems that so many people are increasingly aware of today, I left out catastrophic looming climate crisis that threatens the obliteration of life on Earth in a short time. We believe that all of these problems are not accidents that can be remedied by the election of one capitalist imperialist ruling class party over the other. Rather, they are inherent in the system of capitalist exploitation, of the private ownership of the wealth by literally less than 1% of the people, and the subordination of everything human to the wealthy who rule the country and own and control the means of production, transportation, and virtually every other financial endeavor on earth. So with that, we have a dual purpose. We will monitor, along with you, the election. We are, to use an old Yiddish expression, going to try to dance on two asses at one wedding. We're going to talk to you about socialist politics and keep an eye out on the election, especially if there is a declaration by Trump that he is a winner vis-a-vis refusing to count the votes of tens of millions of people. So we'll interrupt with periodic updates as best we can. And in the meantime, I'd like to introduce our speakers one at a time. So let's start from the East Coast with Marty Goodman, a member of our National Committee and the Political Committee, a former member of the Executive Board of the Transportation Union, I think it's Local 100, a lifelong trade union activist. Marty, what's planned today if there is a coup in New York City? And what's your take on the elections?
Well, I agree with what you're saying about the Biden-Trump extravaganza, mostly farcical race that's taking place. Those billionaires are on both sides of the fence on this one, as they are really in every capitalist election. However, Biden has the predominant support of the billionaire Wall Street class. So anyone who's looking for any changes under Biden is suffering a very big illusion. That's not going to happen. People are talking about getting liberated when Trump is out of the way. Not going to happen. Biden is bellicose towards Venezuela, Cuba, and has been a supporter of war and the police departments around the country for his entire career, and is in fact calling for more support to the police. So it's rather sad that so-called African-American leaders are promoting Biden as a real alternative to Trump. He may be giving more money to the police than Trump himself. Now in New York City, they just christened 900 new police officers under the administration of Bill de Blasio, who's a self-proclaimed socialist. And there's 500 more in the pipeline, I understand. So anyone who sees any substantial difference between the two parties is living a lie, as I say. Well, we're trying to mount a working class alternative, class challenge. Most of the left in the country, for many reasons, some of them not, some of them doing it innocently, you might say, some of them not so innocently, supporting so-called left Democrats, like the squad in the Democratic Party. I myself started out supporting McCarthy, Eugene McCarthy in the 60s. So I understand that sentiment, but it is always an illusion to have faith in any capitalist personality or party. They will always let you down. They will always betray you. And, starting with Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War and going back even further than that. But every Democrat that's come in since the Vietnam War has championed neoconservative goals, attacked unions, attacked working people, have not raised the minimum wage fundamentally for the last 40 years. And we are now more broke than we ever were. Our real income has not gone up for the last several decades. So we want to challenge all of that and challenge the idea that the Democrats, be it left, center, or right Democrats, offer any alternative to right-wing racist republicanism. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Marty. You'll note that we're joined by a very religious-looking fellow from Canada. So his name is Barry Weisletter, and he has a literal halo over his head, sent to us from the gods. Welcome, Barry Weisletter. We're going around, Robin, to explain what socialists think of the election, what our program is. Barry is the Federal Secretary of Socialist Action Canada, and it's Montreal, Quebec associate. So next we'll go to my vice presidential running mate, Anne Montague. Anne is, again, a lifelong trade unionist, an activist in the state of Oregon in the Service Employees International Union, and among the founders of its Lavender Caucus, defending LGBTQI rights, and is also a member of a caucus within the union, which is struggling to rid the trade union movement and SEIU with COP union affiliates. And welcome, and tell us your view of the election, what's happening, and what perspectives there are if this election should be stolen or attempted to be stolen by Donald Trump.
Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me?
Yes, Dan, go ahead.
Okay, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, right. Yes, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. I think
And you do have
one
a
of the things
bad connection. You might want to try again because we hear every other word. So in the meantime,
oh dear.
while you're readjusting or perhaps going on voice only, let's turn to Lisa Lunenberg from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Lisa, as I said, is a longtime immigration rights activist, a member of our National Committee and Political Committee, and a long-term anti-war fighter. Lisa, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me today, Jeff. It's great to be here. This is really an election like none other than I can remember in my lifetime. Everyone has their eyes on the election tonight and what the results will be. Something that I just wanted to talk about that hasn't been brought up yet is, I was watching some of the election coverage earlier this evening online, and some of the commentators were noting that there doesn't seem to be a large turnout for Biden among the African American community, especially African American male voters are not turning out to vote for Biden in the numbers that they were expecting. That didn't seem very surprising to me. I don't think that, I'm from Minneapolis, and we saw thousands of people pouring into the streets here earlier this summer after George Floyd was brutally murdered by the police. And I think that working class people and people of color, people in the African American community or the immigrant community, they understand where the power lies in the political system. And they understand that candidates like Joe Biden, even though he may be the so-called progressive candidate, don't necessarily have their interests at heart. So, here in Minneapolis, they already have boarded up the windows of the businesses downtown. They're obviously preparing for more protesting, more people pouring out into the streets as we see the results of this election. So in my opinion, I think that, no matter what the outcome is in this election, whether Trump is the winner, whether Biden wins, whether Trump declares a coup and tries to steal the election from Biden, there's a really deep layer of social discontent in our country right now that's really affecting working class people, people of color, women, immigrants, LGBTQI people, and that social discontent isn't going to go away. So yeah.
Can we ask our engineer, who is keeping an eye on the votes, whether or not you can tell us whether or not there's been a dramatic turn of events today, or is it still too early in the evening?
Hi, Jeff. Well, it looks like it's still too early in the evening to say much about the vote so far. Several states have been reported, but in general, it's the ones that are most predictable. And so no states have been reported yet that for a candidate that didn't go to that same party in the last election. So there haven't no votes or no states have changed or flipped from red to blue. And so in general, the states that have come in are things like Massachusetts for the Democrats, Wyoming, and Oklahoma for the Republicans, and pretty standard results.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, Barry Weisletter. My introductory remarks said that our evening was going to be divided into two parts. One, an exposition of our socialist ideas and why we never vote for capitalist candidates, because we think that the system of capitalism, which both represent, is essentially responsible for all the evils that are increasingly becoming known by the American people. That is institutional or systemic racism, poverty, unemployment. The actual unemployment rate is not the 6.5% that the government claims, but the labor participation rate is closer to 65%, that is 35 to 37% of the American people who are eligible to work don't have jobs, or they work in part-time gig economy, poverty wage jobs. We're opposition. We call for the abolition of the war budget. Of course, we're for a rapid, if not very rapid, ending of the reliance on fossil fuels and for a fully sustainable energy system based on nationalizing the great corporate owners of fossil fuels who pollute the earth and threaten catastrophe. And we are for the immediate and total withdrawal of all US troops everywhere in the world. The abolition of the military budget, 100%. We can use that $1 trillion to fund free quality health care for everyone. That is, let the rich pay for it. So Barry, what's your take as an outsider to American politics on the US election? Have you ever seen in a lifetime a president declare that he rejects a peaceful transition and that he may declare himself president by abrogating the right to vote of tens of millions of people and calling in federal troops to enforce that decision if he wants to? You're muted, Barry. Please unmute. There you go.
Good evening, comrades and friends. It's a pleasure to participate in this program with you. We're watching the results coming in here as well. And Jeff, I'm just wondering whether you've bought a new dinner jacket. Are you ready to move into the White House? I mean, you've provided American working people with something to vote for, as opposed to what we see unfolding in this sham election, something to vote against, one and the other, through hurling insults at the opponents. You need to paint the White House red, and that's what Socialist Action stands for on both sides of the border. You've got a two-party system. In Canada, there are 5 parties in the federal parliament, but only one of them provides even a glimpse of an alternative to the system of exploitation and oppression. The labor-based New Democratic Party is somewhere between 15 and 20% of the vote, and a share of the federal parliament, but still doesn't provide a route to escape from the triple crisis of the world capitalist system, the economic depression, the climate catastrophe, and of course the health crisis, the pandemic known as COVID-19. So that's a problem that working people face around the world. But what the American system lacks in elegance, it makes up for to some extent in brutal drama. That's what's unfolding on our screens tonight as we watch the election. And what we learn from this experience is the need for a working class alternative to the sham of bourgeois elections north and south of the border. That's why we're so pleased to be in solidarity with you as you fight for an alternative for working people in this context. The ruling rich are going to win with whatever the result tonight in the American political system, and unfortunately, north of the border, even with a five-party system in Parliament, the ruling class wins each and every time. Canadian workers are concerned about the protectionist policies of both the big business party leaders in the United States, fearful of the cost in jobs and economic prosperity that protectionism presents to working people on both sides and around the world. So we watch with interest to see what unfolds and whether there'll be civil unrest as a result of the election. What the unpredictable Trump is going to do in the context of a race which may be out of his grasp, but certainly not out of the frame of his petulant annoyance at what passes for politics in the American electoral system.
Thanks, Barry. I understand that Nick has a bit of an update on the progress of this bourgeois $13.3 billion election between the ruling rich. Nick, what's happening?
The new analysis and results coming in from Arizona make it appear that Biden will win Arizona, and that would be the first state to flip from the Republicans to the Democrats, or from one party to the other tonight. So that would be the first result that isn't simply along the predictable lines of this sham election, as comrades have said.
You know, I want to talk about COVID-19. Here we are into the 6th, 7th, 8th month of this pandemic, and the latest tragedy is that something like 80% of all the states have had a rise in the number of cases and the percentage of people who are testing positive for it. And this includes all states, because whether the administration has been Democrat or Republican, they have all urged and organized the return to work. The largest school district in the country, in New York City, with 1.4 million students, presided over by the Cuomo brother, and de Blasio, the mayor, tried to reopen several times with disastrous results, contrary to what every serious scientist said. They said we can open safely, but they had no answers to any of the fundamental questions, like even a tiny percentage of the youngsters coming home and infecting, or school workers or teachers coming home and infecting their parents or grandparents and spreading the disease. And that's exactly what happened. And in California, the progressive state, where the Democrats control probably 2/3, if not 3/4 of the legislature, they want to open up. And in each case, the officials, Democrat and Republican, argue that we need to get people back to work. What they really mean is we have to restart the economy, and the capitalist economy is contingent on the exploitation of human labor for profit. no self-respecting capitalist would hire a worker if they didn't profit by exploiting that worker for profit. That's the nature of the system. And therefore, an economy with no workers doesn't make sense. So you might say, well, what are socialists going to do? Everybody has to work. Not in our view. Not in our view. We don't believe in sending workers back to their death, which is what both wings of the ruling class have done. We now have over 9 million people who have tested positive for this disease and heading towards 250,000 people who are dead. And by February, the projection is 500,000. And if the moron Trump, and forgive me for singling him out, because he's proposing a herd immunity theory where he let nature take its course, don't use masks, let everybody get infected. Only the most people or old people like myself will die, but what the heck? We'll have the 99%, who are left. So we lose 1 million or 2 million or 3 million people, which is what the scientists say will be the case in February if Trump has his way. So basically the system, or you might ask, well, what's our view? Well, let's start with a couple of simple points. No one back to work that is not necessary to provide food and the essentials of life. And those people that do go back to work will have 100% protection in every way scientifically and free quality health care of the quality that the president got when he got infected, and triple the wage because they're risking their lives to keep the system going, and a ban on all foreclosures, all evictions, all rent for working people. That's what a socialist society would do. We'd take care of the masses of people rather than sacrifice them on the altar of profit, which is what makes the capitalist system go round. We could have free health care for everyone, quality health care. Most advanced capitalist countries have it, not the United States. We're one of the most highly profitable industries is the pharmaceutical and healthcare. On vaccines, we have an insane situation in the United States where all of the major corporations are fighting each other as to who's going to be the winner. And according to a Wall Street Journal analyst, the worst possible variant in the competition between the 5 major healthcare scientific organizations looking for a vaccine is, hold your breath, that if they all come up with a cure together for capitalism, that's the worst variant. Because everybody will have access, the price will be diminished. The best variant is that 4 out of 5 fail, and that one of them, according to this Wall Street analyst of profits, one of them survives with a vaccine that is only partially successful. So the government can continue to pour billions of dollars into this system. In our view, in any rational society, we would collectivize and combine the research facilities of every single scientific organization in the United States, if not the planet, to take the full knowledge and achievements of science and collectively fight for a vaccine. That way, if one group of scientists comes up with a cure, everybody is on the same page and trying to develop that further. And if one figures out that that potential cure is faulty, nobody will have to spend another year or 2 testing a serum or a vaccine that is not faulty. In capitalism, life itself depends on profit. In socialism, there would be a collective effort to quickly find a vaccine and make it available to everyone, to share all of the scientific knowledge rather than put it in the framework of capitalist profit. So that's one of the fundamental contradictions. Joe Biden is on board with that. Joe Biden is for an increased military budget over the $775 billion that the Democrats proposed, that the Trump administration proposed. Biden proposed to up it $50 billion on every fundamental question, except one. And here's where I win, hands down. is I have a tremendous personality. If you elect me, I'll be the nicest guy. I will smile all the time. I will promise everything, except I'll keep every promise because I will have the full power of the state. Whereas Biden smiles all the time and does exactly what Trump does on every question, if not worse on some questions. Biden criticizes Trump for withdrawing a few troops from Afghanistan and Syria. Biden criticizes Trump for his comments that are negative on NATO. He wants a stronger NATO. He wants more troops abroad. He wants a larger military budget. And of course, Biden criticizes Trump for going against the CIA and the FBI. The Democrats have been the largest proponents of the FBI investigations. So we have some really terrible contradictions in capitalism. And yet we have an election of $13.3 billion where they're telling us to choose the lesser evil. Comments from our group. I'll allow you to raise a hand. There's Marty Goodman, who is very shy normally in speaking once or twice in a meeting. Marty, what's your take on the politics that the spectacle of the politics that the American people are confronted with today?
Well, I know in New York, we don't take things lying down very much. There are protests every day, multiple protests usually. And over the summer, of course, massive demonstrations over the racist killing of George Floyd. Tens of thousands poured into the streets. Traffic was blocked, highways blocked. A lot, incredible momentum from the youth and a lot of diversity in those demonstrations. I think in many ways we were a beacon for the left in the country, although of course other places had big demos also. However, in regard to Trump's threats, there's been some mobilizations and a proposed one for Wednesday. Last Sunday, we had a anti-fascist demonstration. The Trumpers had a caravan, which included the Proud Boys in a caravan through Manhattan. And the United Against Racism and Fascism and outlived them, mobilized. And they went after the Trump people nonviolently. And that's what Socialist Action wants to do, is build mass, nonviolent, legal mobilizations. They went to meet the Trumpers, and when they got to the West Side Highway in Chelsea, they missed the Trumpers. But the cops started arresting people as they were walking home. And it was also discovered or seen that the Trumpers in their caravan obscured all the license plates on their cars, which is a violation of the law. Yet the cops allowed them to proceed without interference. Now, there's a thing that's happening across the country. If Trump seriously tries to void the election or suppress the vote, there's 500 events that are planned so far across the country to defend democracy and the vote. And it's pretty much being organized by the Democratic Party. But since it calls for the democratic rights of people in this country, we'll support it. And there may be a big one on Wednesday. Go to the website, Protect the Results, and sign up to get an email and information on those demonstrations. There'll be several demonstrations projected, and you'll get all the information on that. I'm involved in the programming committee, and we expect a large turnout from that. And we want to also get out our socialist literature. So if anyone that is listening wants to help us distribute our wonderful Socialist Action newspaper and some of our literature, please get a hold of me via the website, and I'll hook you up with our activities on Wednesday. But it's not a foregone conclusion that there'll be that rally, but we expect that there might be. So stay tuned. We'll know by about noon on Wednesday whether that will happen. But there needs to be mass mobilizations across the country. And certainly the most important point I want to make before I forget is the calls for a general strike of workers. Nothing would more powerfully stop Trump, or at least make him hesitate, would be a general strike of workers, where workers just put down their tools. And all the auto shops and the IBEW and all of the institutions in this country that are unionized, and hopefully unorganized workers would go out too. And I would suggest there be a general strike to stop the spread of COVID and stop forcing workers to choose between their rent, their food for their family, and dying from COVID. This has got to stop, and workers need to stand up. That's the tradition of our party, to call for militant resistance and militant struggle. So I don't know if the AFL-CIO has reached a decision yet. There's been a few labor councils that have called for a general strike. The Rochester, New York one has, also one in Western Massachusetts. There may be others, but I think that's the route we got to go if we want to really show the incredible power of the working class. Just end on this: when our transit workers, and I'm a transit worker, went out on strike in 2005, this city shut down. And there was nothing that the ruling class or Wall Street could do about it. They lost $100 million a day. And that would be a blow to the ruling class across the country if we shut it down from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The power of workers is unlimited.
Marty, thank you. After the murder in Minneapolis of George Floyd, an estimated 15 to 26 million people went into the streets around the country. The largest protests in the history of the United States, if not the history of the world, initiated by the prime victims of systemic racism. We saw the amazing additional spectacle of millions of white workers taking to the streets in the face of COVID-19 to stand shoulder to shoulder with their Black sisters and brothers. That changed the consciousness of the American people. Lisa, tell us about these protests. Tell us about whether or not they were nonviolent, peaceful, or, as Trump said, violent Antifa protests. Tell us about the effect on the consciousness of people in the Twin Cities, if not nationally.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm from Minneapolis. I live probably less than a mile from where George Floyd was murdered, and very close to the 3rd Precinct police station in Minneapolis that was burned during the protests and riotings that happened following George Floyd's murder earlier this year. So like Jeff said, you know, we saw just a huge reaction to this murder that happened, that the world watched. But you know, this has been a problem in Minneapolis for a long time. This is something that my community has been fighting against for years. We saw it happen to Jamar Clark, CeCe McDonald, so many other people here, not just in Minnesota, but all around the country. So this is something that we've been struggling against for a long time. Also, I've been involved in organizing within the immigrant community here in Minneapolis for many years. And this is something that we're very familiar in fighting against is, cops who practice racial profiling against immigrants and people of color on a daily basis who get pulled over. They get booked into jail for minor traffic violations. And then they get deported. They're separated from their families when they haven't committed any crimes. This is something that we've been fighting against for a long time. So I don't think it was surprising, but I think that, this brutal murder that everyone watched happen on social media, combined with the impact that COVID-19 has been having on the community, just lit this spark in Minneapolis that just took off around the world of protests. And the Black community, the immigrant community, women, like these are the people who are being hardest hit by COVID right now. These are the communities that are where people are losing their jobs, they're being evicted from their homes, and then to have this brutal murder happen on top of that, it just ignited a rage. I felt it in my community. But I will say that the majority of the protests here were very peaceful. During the day, there were thousands of people in the streets, but they were peaceful protests and people were standing up for what they thought was right. It was during the night that things got out of hand. There was definitely rioting and a lot of destruction that happened in Minneapolis that had a big impact on our community. We lost most of our grocery stores and pharmacies in my neighborhood. But the point here is that capitalism relies on racism to divide the working class. They want to divide Black people and brown people and white people, working people from each other, when really we have the same interests at heart. We're facing the same system and the same problems. They don't want us to join together because they know the power that we have when we take to the streets. And we saw that power during these protests that came in the wake of George Floyd's murder. So it's not just a matter of a bad cop here or there or reforming the police system. The police are the enforcing arm of the capitalist state. So it's, the solving the problem of systemic racism, it's not going to go away unless we get rid of capitalism itself, unless we change that fundamental system that oppresses working class people and divides us from each other. That's the only way that we can combat racism. And I think one of the most inspiring things that came out of this wave of protests has just been the feeling of solidarity, the feeling of people standing by each other, helping each other during these really difficult times, and just the level that people's consciousness has been raised, I would say, across the board. People that are starting to understand and really grapple with these issues in a way that they never have before. So for me, it was a very difficult and emotional time, but also just hugely inspiring to see the city where I live respond the way that it did. And so I think that, as we see the election results, obviously these issues didn't go away. They're still here. There hasn't been any major police reform. And a lot of these cops, they're still getting away with murdering Black people every day. They get off without charges. So these issues aren't going away, and the discontent that people are feeling aren't going away. So I think we're going to continue to see waves of protests following the election results.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I'm trying to get Ann Montague back from Salem. Meanwhile, we're joined by National Committee member Gary Bills from Salem, Oregon, and by John Pottinger, who is on our National Committee from Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Gary and John. We started our evening with 2 points.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice.
The first is to explain to our listeners why we ran for president, why we're running for president, why we're going to win this election if we build our revolutionary party. As Marty Goodman says, check us out at socialistaction.org, our website. You can join, make contributions, send in comments, take a subscription to our monthly newspaper, Socialist Action. In the meantime, the second aspect of the meeting was to monitor the elections, which I'm sure everybody is doing at home through their own television. And we're asking Nick to serve a dual purpose. He's the editor of our newspaper, and he's watching closely to see what's developing in the elections. Well, in the meantime, I want to follow through with the point that Ann made and Marty, and that is, for the first time in my life, you have the head of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, calling a meeting of trade unions to talk about the fact that several central labor councils in important cities like Rochester or Washington State or Troy have passed resolutions calling on the national AFL-CIO with 14 million members to organize a general strike if President Trump moves to abrogate their right to vote. Just imagine the impact. We have already registered, as Lisa said, the impact of tens of millions in the streets in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. It broke down all the myths that the American people are racist. CNN had a poll that said that 84% of the American people support the anti-racist demonstration, the anti-police brutality demonstrations. What would happen if millions of workers defending the fundamental right to vote, however distorted that vote is by billionaires who are the candidates, but if the AFL-CIO and trade unions across the country closed down the country, stopped all production, forcing the government and the corporations to back off and to count their votes, regardless of whether the votes go to Biden or Trump. That would send a message to working people that they are the majority, that they have the power. That's the power of mass action. People, their entire lives are told that they can't change things, can't fight City Hall. You have to just passively vote. But when the civil rights movement mobilized millions, or the early trade union movement shut down the major industries in the country, it changed the consciousness of working people and forced the capitalists to retreat in some areas. So if I may ask John Pottinger, what is the feeling in Chicago about these mass protests? Has it shaken the consciousness? Is anything planned should Trump try to steal the election? What's your take on the power of this Black Lives Matter movement, as well as its limitations? John, what do you think?
Yeah, there are several protests that I've found on the internet planned for tomorrow, should Trump try anything, and maybe even if he doesn't, then I hope to be at least one of them. And it's a big mass movement that's changed the opinions of almost everybody to some extent or another. It's changed our times. I'm not sure what else I've got to say on it at the moment, though. The only other thing, which is not exactly to your point, but there's a referendum for a graduated income tax in Illinois. Illinois is one of the 2 states that don't have one apparently, and it's not going well, I'm afraid. The no's are ahead slightly.
Thanks, Gary. Gary Bills from Salem, Oregon. You want to join the discussion and tell us what your perspective is? You're from Oregon, which is one of the states that the Trump administration is focused on as being riddled with Antifa anarchists who are intent on violence. And yet central officials in the Oregon government have come out against the police attacks and tear gas and plainclothes cops who are really federal agents arresting people on no charges whatsoever. What's the mood in Oregon? Is it the exception to the rule? Is it one state populated by anarchists? Or are they working people outraged at society's systemic racism? Gary, what do you think?
Well, it's hard to gauge right now what kind of mobilization will happen after the election, of course, because we don't know what the results of the election are yet. But there's been an attempt by the most reactionary elements that Donald Trump seeks to tap into and mobilize. They try to counter mobilize against the demonstrations of Black Lives Matter. And then, of course, they're mobilizing against the kind of black bloc anarchists who have employed quite a lot of, violence in the name of Black Lives Matter, in the name of things supposedly progressive. It's all been counterproductive. It doesn't mobilize, the numbers that the peaceful parts of the movement does. And it certainly gives a target for the right wingers. But that being said, of course, the right wingers, in spite of the fact that they like to carry around guns and they try to attack people, there's a big backlash, of course, when they employ violence as well. That's just not how, the huge majority of the population thinks that political differences should be dealt with. I certainly think that if Trump attempted a coup, that a general strike strategy, the employing of traditional working class methods of struggle would be greeted very positively. But yeah, it's hard to gauge. I mean, you're just kind of guessing and hypothesizing until the real events unfold. But I think the verdict is out on what happens to those who employ violence to try to get their way. If Trump tries to go that way, I think he'll suffer a severe backlash.
When I said, and these are official statistics reported by groups from the New York Times and the major media, that something like 95% of all the protests, that is protests including people in 2,000 cities, up to 26 million people, were peaceful. That's the reason why they were massive. And a handful of anarchists, or more often police provocateurs, which we've seen, breaking windows is aimed at either calling attention to themselves or discrediting the movement. For us, mass action, millions in the streets, like we expect would happen or will happen tomorrow if this election is stolen, and Nick, our engineer, tells us there is yet nothing new on that. We're going to have to perhaps wait. It's 11 o'clock in New York City. The ballot boxes are, election day is nearing an end, but there are still many millions of votes to carry. But the idea that in thousands of cities in the United States, millions of people in the streets, is a major contributor to the notion that the people have the power to change the world. I never heard the words uttered by millions that this society suffers from systemic racism, not just now, but going back to the days of slavery. And today, the prison industrial complex is a modern example, increasingly privatized, for profit, at an average wage across the United States of 50 cents an hour. The poor and dispossessed, the school to prison scenario is operative, where millions of people, majority of Black and Latino and Native American, are sent to prison to work for Fortune 500 corporations for virtually nothing. People are aware of that. I believe 1 out of 5 families, Black families in the United States, has someone in prison. They are victims of a racist society. And when the statues of the Civil War heroes and their portraits in Congress are torn down by either mass mobilizations against these racist images or by vote of the Congress of the United States, and police brutality is universally recognized, as is broad-ranging discrimination and discriminatory laws, voter suppression laws around the country, then people in particular are becoming more aware than ever. Let me raise 2 questions for you to consider. And perhaps this is new ground. On the one hand, we've seen the Black Lives Matter organized forces, I'm not talking about the millions in the streets, devolve into small groups like Movement for Black Lives, who have had conferences and demonstrations specifically aimed at getting out the vote for Joseph Biden. We know of no wings of the Black Lives Matter that have not been essentially absorbed into the Democratic Party, if not funded by major corporations and so on. That really cries out the nature of the moment, the crisis of leadership. The idea that the most oppressed, welcome back, Ann.
Thank you.
The idea that the most oppressed are herded into the Democratic Party, not to mention for Joe Biden, who for a lifetime served the role as the right-wing, near-segregationist component of the Democratic Party, which historically ran moderate, liberal Northerners like JFK and his running mate, a Southern Texas Yahoo, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had his own land with codicils in it that couldn't sell his own property to blacks. That was the norm. And when the Republicans took over the Democratic Party with the help of the most virulent racists like George Wallace, who was the governor of Alabama and opposed school desegregation, ran for president and took 5 southern states with him, the Nixon administration essentially absorbed the racist component of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. So in order to win votes in the South, the Democrats were forced to run former heirs of the Southern racist slavocracy, like Jimmy Carter, who was a segregationist, went to a segregated church, was against school busing, and demanded that Nixon not resign from the presidency. He was a Democrat. And then Bill Clinton comes from Arkansas, a state with where the slaveocracy prevailed. And Al Gore, whose father was an open racist segregationist, in order to capture a few electoral votes. The Democrats ran the heirs of the Southern racist aristocracy. Joe Biden played that role for the Democratic Party. He worked with the Clinton administration on the crime bill that led to mass incarceration of blacks. It was his job to sheep herd these Southern racists back into the Democratic Party by supporting legislation that met the needs of the Southern racist slaveocracy today in its modern form. So today, there's nothing progressive about it. Joe Biden, he voted for every war budget there was, every imperialist war. And he made clear that he's no socialist when attacked by Trump in the first debate. He said, I beat Bernie Sanders, and Bernie he basically is moving as far right as he can. He has no program other than profits for the bosses on climate change. He has no program to challenge the major corporate industries. He has no Green New Deal. He has no idea of Black control of the Black community to end the police murder and brutalities. He has no anti-war program, no environmental program, and no COVID-19 program. He is anything but Trump. And he represents, in my view, the majority of the ruling class today that doesn't like the naked face of hate representing the United States government on a world scale. They would rather have a naked face of hate with a smile, like Joe Biden, a warmongering man with a racist legacy of supporting reactionary laws of mass incarceration, so-called criminal justice. So we have a strange situation in the United States, and we're told that we have to vote between the lesser of two evils again. Sadly, most of the left has capitulated to that view. We haven't. We think that the problems that we've addressed tonight are inherent in the system and that no multi-billionaire party is capable of even beginning to address them other than with the kind of window dressing rhetoric that President Obama used. He came off as a humanistic president and deported 3 million people. He was known as the Great Deporter. He ran 7 wars simultaneously. So with that, I have a question. Up until this moment, this special moment that we're in, I've resisted the idea of saying that there are serious right-wing reactionary forces in America. I tended to say that it was a handful of racist bigots with sticks and clubs and wearing fascist swastikas, but that the broad working class was not at that point. And yet we see significant support as the election returns come in for the likes of an open racist warmongering bigot threatening violence and hate against the oppressed, against immigrants, and getting the support of millions of people, at least in the electoral arena. Yes, you can say it's the result of the failure of the Democrats to provide any solutions to unemployment, mortgage foreclosures, endless wars, climate crisis, or whatever. But are we seeing a serious polarization in the United States? I'm beginning to think that might be the case.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Here's Siri talking to me. So, who'd like to take a stab at that? Barry, what's your take? What do you see in the United States? Are we facing a serious right-wing potential in this country, which is headed towards implementing reactionary positions? Or is it just working people frustrated with the abysmal record of the Democrats saying, you know, we don't trust you anymore? What are we looking at? The floor is open.
Oh, maybe I could say something.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of weeks I gave a forum on the election to a small group of people in Chicago, and preparing for that forum, I off the top of my head, I wrote down the bad things about Joe Biden, and without thinking very hard, I came up with 17 bad things. Yeah, 17. And I think I actually missed a one or two major things in addition to that. Let me just try to go fast down to 17. Of course, he was against busing back in the 1970s, as his running mate pointed out in one of the debates. He's one of the architects of the mass incarceration. He's a supporter of the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment, can you believe that? That's really bad. A lot of people don't know what the Hyde Amendment is. The Hyde Amendment says that you can't use federal funds for abortion or to talk about abortion, I think, or there's a lot of restrictions. It's a very bad thing. And of course, he's anti-abortion. There was the way he treated Anita Hill. The Iraq sanctions, which ended up killing 1 million people, half of whom were children, because of the committee he was on at the time. Even though he was a senator and not in the administration, he bears a lot of responsibility for that. The Iraq War, not only did he vote for it, but he was very enthusiastic about it too. He's against Medicare for all, which I might point out, without Medicare for all, that each year, and this is figures before COVID, each year, 68,000 people die needlessly. Had they had Medicare for all, those 68,000 people would not be dead. He's for more police, not less police. He's for shooting people in the leg as opposed to shooting to kill. And you might measure the progress that the Democratic Party has made since 1968, when Mayor Daley came out saying, Mayor Daley, Democrat of Chicago, and Mayor of Chicago said shoot to kill. And now here in 2020, they've got advanced as far as just shooting people in the leg. He's taken money from the credit card companies. At the same time, he was rewriting the bankruptcy laws that make it much harder for people to declare bankruptcy. His son, Hunter Biden, is in fact corrupt in that just being on that board of the Ukrainian gas company means that if somebody messed with that corrupt gas company, and it was corrupt, the English tried to take it to court, but failed, they would risk offending Biden, who was vice president at the time, and Ukraine could like withhold money or aid to the Ukraine. So it does count as corruption. There was the allegation that he's a possible rapist, although the woman who made the allegations was found to have cheated on her resume. And as everybody in the world knows, that anybody who cheats on a resume could not have been raped. Let's see, he's been involved in inappropriate touching, and he's against the Green New Deal. And of course, he was vice president during the deporter in chief time. And as a side note, he's also a teetotaler. And that was 19 and not 17. So, with a record like that goes back decades, it's not surprising that the Democrats are not whipping up a lot of enthusiasm for this guy. In a way, for Biden, it's been fortunate that the COVID thing happened because he got to sit in his basement for months on end, not talking about anything or not making any news. And that was probably the best thing that ever happened to his campaign. Well, that's all I got to say at the moment.
Yeah, Anne, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, sorry, I had to drive home. Sorry, I had to drive home to get to my a good connection. So I missed some of this discussion, but I wanted to make a couple of comments. As I understand it, Jeff is asking, is there a serious right-wing component within the working class? And I don't have a yes or no answer on that. But what I do think is that the working class is so disempowered in every way. There's not even a bourgeois working class party. The unions in the main are controlled by the Democratic Party. They don't strike. They aren't involved in mass actions with the workers. And so I think certainly that could be true, but I think that a lot of that frustration comes from just feeling totally disempowered. And I wanted to add just something a little different on the side. I was thinking when I was driving back, I wanted to talk about when we talk about we don't support capitalist parties or candidates. And the question, of course, of what we do support is mass action. And right now there's a great example in Poland of mass action where the women have been striking and committing civil disobedience over another right-wing attempt to restrict or eliminate their abortion rights. And in Poland, there's a right-wing authoritarian leader who, in collusion with a right-wing Catholic Church, is trying to basically eliminate all abortion rights. But the thing that was interesting is, I think it was yesterday I saw that that leader, that authoritarian leader, said he was going to put that bill on hold, and everyone knew why it was. It was because of the women who were empowered in a mass action. And but it was interesting that he showed his misogyny and that he said he's putting it on hold because it's such an emotional issue, which is interesting. But anyway, that's just a good example of mass action. And I think there just aren't enough examples of that. And in this country, I think that workers just feel totally disempowered. That's it.
Thanks, Ann. Marty.
Yeah, on the question of, the far right and the advance or lack of advance of the fascist right. I can't say that there's a mass fascist movement in this country, but I could tell you a few things. That Biden is so bland, so colorless, that he has no appeal for workers. And he really represents no alternative. Every speech that I hear from him is so full of these mundane cliches that it's very understandable that Trump is able to whip up emotional frenzy around some of these issues and grab the attention of working people. It leaves Biden's lack of leadership leaves a lot of room for the far right to organize. And it seems to be more and more ideological. Demonstrations, I'm called a liberal, which is so stupid, by these right wingers. And they're getting so hyper about just being a liberal that it's unbelievable. I remember seeing Trump at a rally speaking to, this maskless crowd, that he said, "Have we forgotten how we treat protesters?" And he balled his fist as if he was going to throw a punch. And it was an open, blatant call to violence against the left, which these days is very, very diverse. The Black, Latino, immigrant population that dominates the demonstrations these days. And there's an aspect of mindlessness that sort of represents to me what took hold in Germany with the Jewish conspiracy, the communist conspiracy. I saw it in my view the other night, a rally led by Trump, in which he said that we're turning the corner on COVID. But the exact opposite is true, as most rational people know, that COVID is spiking all over the country, if not the world. It just seems like no lie is too fantastic. And we, get into the realm of mythologizing the enemies of the far right, the racism involved. I saw a Texas guy, he was interviewed, a Trump supporter, and the reporter asked him, "Why are you supporting Trump?" He says, "Well, the Black Lives Matter protests are getting out of hand." But as Lisa just pointed out, and I'll point out also, that, and Jeff, that the overwhelming majority of demonstrations against the racist cops or George Floyd were peaceful. So there's a gathering storm on the far right, and only real working class leadership, revolutionary leadership is the only solution, only alternative to these far right ideologies. And we've got to provide that leadership. That was true in the 30s, the fascist movements throughout Europe. Also true here. It's been true always historically, that without real leadership of the working class, some workers will fall victim to the ideological far right. And these movements have been led by the lower middle class generally, and at a certain point, the ruling class will begin to support these movements if it looks like they have a chance to win. But what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, is a growing ideological consolidation of these racist, imperialist positions that are very dangerous. And to repeat again, I think there needs to be a working class alternative clearly presented to working people.
Thanks, Marty. Well, here's where we stand tonight. Nick reports that Wisconsin has announced that they won't have the results until tomorrow morning. And Pennsylvania and Michigan may not have election results until Friday. With regard to all three, Trump has threatened that he's not going to wait for these votes to be counted. He considers them to be beyond the pale, beyond the time that he has declared that he will be president of the United States at the end of this evening. So we don't know what's going to happen at this point. We're running out of time, so I'm going to ask our participants from across the country to summarize their take on the political scene in the United States in a couple of minutes, no more than two perhaps, and then we will sign off for the evening with the full understanding that if the President of the United States is going to abrogate the right to vote of millions of people, the only place for revolutionaries and socialists and people of goodwill and supporters of democratic rights is to be in the streets. I've been invited to be a keynote speaker in Richmond, California, right outside of Oakland and Berkeley, tomorrow at 1:45. and I'll be there. Our comrades will be there with our newspaper and defending democratic rights while in no way lending support to Joseph Biden, just another candidate of the racist, reactionary, warmongering ruling class. So let's see a final list of people. I saw Barry's hand up, and Marty, not reluctant for 2 minutes, and we'll go around the table for everyone else, and then we'll say good evening. Check us out at socialistaction.org, at socialistaction at lmi.net, which is our email. Join us, get involved, become a member, a supporter, or a contributor. You can do it all on our website. So let's start with our guest, the Federal Secretary from Socialist Action Canada. Thanks for joining us, Barry Weisletter.
You're
Hey,
muted.
Okay, I think you can hear me now. Jeff, you posed the question earlier. What does it look like? What does the American political landscape look like to an observer from outside? And I can say that it looks like class polarization in the face of the crisis of late capitalism. Now that's a generalization, but we know the particular features that combine to um, um, lead us to conclude that this is a almost unprecedented level of class polarization, but it's not a structured response by the working class. Likewise, I don't think we're in a pre-fascist coup situation. That's how it appears from here, that fascism is an option for the capitalist ruling class when they're faced with the prospect of workers' revolution. Well, the latter is not on the agenda yet, and still, the polarization is reflected in Trump's followers who reflect an alienation towards the political establishment and towards a failed economic system, but it's not a centralized fascist movement. He has, however, attracted an array of thugs who are armed to the teeth and carry out provocative actions, even on a small scale, like the attempted in Texas, I think it was, to force a Biden campaign bus off the road. He's attracted an array of thugs, and more worrisome is the fact that Trump or whoever succeeds him in the White House has the U.S. National Guard, the Army, and the police to terrorize the working class population, especially people of color. So that's worrisome enough. And absent, of course, is a political instrument to advance a workers' agenda on a large scale. There's no Labor Party. There's a great need for a Labor Party, and maybe that opportunity, that prospect will rise in the context of the present struggles unfolding. I think your emphasis on the need to defend democratic rights is right on the mark, and we are in complete solidarity with you, and actions that will likely unfold in response to an attempt by Trump to void the election results or to block the counting of votes, and to try to prolong his eccentric reign over the presidency. It's important to counter that with the direct protest actions in the streets, and I've alerted our organization, our members from Nova Scotia to Vancouver Island, to be ready to take to the streets in solidarity with the movement in the United States against any coup attempt or authoritarian rule, more authoritarian rule. This effort to defend democratic rights will win advanced workers to the perspective of mass action as a method of struggle, not reliance on the sham electoral system, which denies millions of working people in the United States, particularly those who are in some way attached to the injustice system, especially people of color. Move towards independent working class political action and socialist transformation. This situation provides an opportunity to do work of that and to advance that perspective and to build a revolutionary eco-socialist workers' party in a way that we haven't seen the possibility in a long time. That's our experience here. We're recruiting dozens of young people, workers, women and men in their 20s and 30s, particularly, who are disgusted by the present global capitalist system, the threat to to nature and civilization, and you know, as a small party, we're welcoming them and trying to engage in action in solidarity with those who are fighting racism and sexism and economic exploitation across the country. If I have a moment, I'll give you some examples of the issues on which we are active across the Canadian state.
As long as it's a moment and not a Canadian moment.
Not a New York moment, like you're
Right.
famous for those.
Give us
Well,
the last.
I'll just cite them by topic. Mass protests against racism and police brutality in the wake of the George Floyd murder took place all across the Canadian state. There's presently a movement against police, and including RCMP, victimization of Indigenous people and people of color. They're more than 3 times more likely to be arrested and killed than white workers. Indigenous lobster fishers on the East Coast, Nova Scotia coast, people, the right to fish for a modest livelihood, and they are being attacked by racist white commercial fishers, denied their right to make a living. Migrant workers are denied health care. Just attended a rally a couple days ago in a downtown park in Toronto to commemorate the dozens and dozens of migrant workers who've died because of lack of health care, because of their precarious status in the country. Justin Trudeau increases the military budget 70% and guarantees wage subsidies to big industry, including the giant retail chains like Amazon and Walmart and the grocers, Sobeys and Loblaw. But the frontline workers, the heroes who were given a $2 wage increase, were stripped of it at the end of the summer. There's billions for pipelines, but not for housing, childcare, clean water on Indigenous lands, and healthcare. So this is the situation, not unlike yours, although there is a mass labor party in Canada. It doesn't meet the needs. We are hosting an Education for Activists conference on Saturday, November 21st. Lisa will be speaking. We're delighted to have her, and thank you again for agreeing to participate in that on Saturday, November 21st. And we invite all Socialist Action members and supporters and friends to tune in and participate in that educational conference that will have 2 sessions on November 21st, a 4 o'clock and 7 p.m. session Eastern time. We look forward to that, and it's great to work with you as always. Thanks very much.
Thanks, and we are putting in a request for an extra 10 minutes for Lisa to speak at your conference, which you owe us as our sister party. Thank you, Barry. Let's go to Marty for a real 2 minutes. We're running out of time. Marty, what's your wrap up?
Okay, I don't know what a real 2 minutes is. I never paid attention to real 2 minutes. Okay.
Marty, got to speak into your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me good now?
Not quite. Move a little closer. Or...
Okay. Good? Okay. I see Trump's attempts at voter suppression to be very real. The attacks on the Postal Service and the postal workers in it are very real and very calculated. DeJoy, who was a Trump supporter, is now the president of the Postal Service. And he's been removing machines to sort envelopes, sort ballots at a very high rate. And he was told to put them back by a court decision, I believe, and he has not done it. And the Postal Service has not been delivering ballots in the efficient way that they've done it in the past. In fact, in one state, it's down to 50-something% of on-time ballots. And the workers there are angry. There was not enough workers put in position to deal with the election, even though everybody on the planet knew when the election was and that there would be mail-in ballots in unprecedented number. So this is struggle that the entire working class must wage against this Trump strategy. And the answer is only mass mobilizations in the streets, flood the streets, shut them down, shut down the highways, shut down all the factories, shut down the banks, shut down the transit system. We're facing attacks in transit as well. But only that mass action of the working class as a whole could really turn back any plans that Trump has to launch a coup. Now, as Barry points out, I don't think the conditions are ripe for a coup as yet. The union movement is very docile, so the ruling class does not face that threat and need to implement such drastic measures at this time. But the time could be coming. Both parties follow the agenda of Wall Street, and the crisis of neoliberalism in this country is very acute. Unemployment is through the roof, and infections are through the roof, and the working class needs to take drastic action.
Thanks, Marty. Okay, final remarks by our other comrades. Anne?
Yeah, just really short. I think what it looks like coming out of this election is the need to continue any united front actions that we may have in protest of Trump, to continue to confront all of these actions by the right wing. I think the problem is, and of course I'm in Oregon, is that, as we know, oftentimes a reaction becomes an ultra-left reaction as opposed to a mass orientation election. And so we probably will see more of that ultra-left action, and that can alienate people that would be willing to participate in mass action. So I just think that's something we need to be aware of, and just continue to reiterate the importance of mass actions in opposed to right-wing terror and ascendancies. That's it.
Thanks. Thanks, Anne. Lisa, Gary, John, you have 2 minutes if you want to take it. And then we'll wrap it up with Nick giving us the latest election update. And we'll move on from there. Lisa?
Sure, yeah. So I agree with everyone's comments tonight. This has been a really great discussion, a very important one. I think we have a perspective that is not heard very often. So thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. And I want to encourage everyone to check out our really great website and our newspaper for more coverage of everything that we've been talking about tonight. Yeah, I just feel like, there's so many people in our country that are disenfranchised by the capitalist system. Their voices are not being heard, and they don't have representation by either ruling party. And I think this is especially prominent among young people. Right now, young people in the US are, becoming more and more aware of systemic racism and all the other horrors that capitalism brings on all of us. And we don't have representation in the political system in the United States. So no matter what happens tonight or tomorrow or in the coming weeks with the election results, like Anne said, what we need to continue doing is organizing, reaching out to people who are like-minded thinkers, who are concerned about the same problems and issues that we are, and meeting with them in the streets, because that's where we're going to get our representation, is by peacefully protesting and building mass actions in the streets.
Thanks. Lisa, further comments before we turn to Nick for an election update? John, you look like you're ready.
Yeah. Yeah, but on my phone, looking at the voting so far in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and at this point, Trump's in a lead in all those states. I think that the Democrats are offering people, the status quo, and people have been dissatisfied with the status quo for a while. I mean, the reason Trump got elected in the first place is that people were deeply dissatisfied with the status quo. And when you offer people nothing, you're not going to get enough people to get off the couch, no matter how much a lot of people hate Trump, to do something about it. So there needs to be a working class alternative. I mean, social section is small, but out there to give people their needs. As the old saying goes, that if you don't have a dream, you'll never have a dream come true. So there's a big space open for a socialist group that can have class independence, offer people solutions to their problems, solutions that are left solution and not the right solution that the Trump people are offering. This is mass discontent in the United States is not going away. It's only going to fester and get worse. And it leaves open to possibilities in both directions, both left and right, as to solutions to this crisis. And it's groups like Socialist Action that could help lead the way towards a humane solution, a socialist solution to this crisis. Democrats may have liked the fact that they defeated Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders, delivered a lot of people to the Democrats. But it's a victory that's going to cost the Democrats, probably in the short run and definitely in the long run. So you need a group like Socialist Action, and not just for election times either, because these mass movements that have been occurring over the last number of months have also been being driven towards the Democrats. And so having mass movements that are independent of the Democrats and Republicans is a big thing too. And that will be the next stage. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, John. Nick, do you want to give us a final update on the elections, plus your own comments on the discussion tonight?
Yes, thanks. I think everything our comrades have said here tonight has been absolutely right on. And this election has shown more than any other recently, and more each time we have an election cycle, the absolute worthlessness of the two capitalist parties for working class people. The fact that they have absolutely nothing to offer working class people except continued and increasing oppression and repression. We've seen Joe Biden's only response to these mass protests against racism in America, against systemic racism, in the name of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and so many more who have been gunned down by the murderous cops. has only been to say that violence from the protesters is never the answer, and to denounce the supposedly violent protests. He has nothing to offer these millions, tens of millions, as Jeff has said, who have been in the streets demanding an end to systemic racism in America. And as comrades have said tonight, these elections, whatever the outcomes, are completely rigged to maintain the rule of the capitalist class without any challenge through the electoral arena from those who represent the interests of the working people, who are diametrically opposed, whose interests are diametrically opposed to those of the capitalists. We have two parties who barely disagree on anything, and when they do, it's generally whether we should have more troops in the Middle East or even more than that, and whether cops should shoot people down or simply shoot them in the leg. That's the choice we're given in these kinds of elections. And as comrades have said, people often don't know where to look, but those who are learning more and more each day that they have nothing to gain from the capitalist parties are looking outside them and looking to the parties that represent their interests. And Socialist Action aims to be that party and to represent the interests of working people in America. And I think we have shown ourselves to be the strongest of those in our refusal to give any ground to the capitalist parties in these elections. When Bernie Sanders came around, we totally rejected the Bernie Sanders sheepdogging for the Democratic Party. And when Joe Biden faced off against the open racist, misogynist, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic Donald Trump, we did not give any ground to Joe Biden to say that people should support the lesser evil. Working class independence is the heart of Socialist Action's politics and continues to be, and we're very proud of that. The election tonight seems to be a very close one. It's certainly been closer than the polls have had it. It seems to be coming down to those swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Biden looks likely to take Arizona, but the race will hinge on those states where Trump has said he will be sending in his lawyers. I'm sure the Democratic lawyers will be going in as well, and we may need the rest of the week to find out the vote results. If indeed Trump is not able to prevent the votes from being counted. And of course, as comrades have said tonight, Socialist Action will be out in the streets demanding that all the votes be counted, because no matter how rigged the election, no matter the sham of capitalist elections where workers are never given any real choice or anything that could advance their interests in any meaningful way, we are not going to cede democracy in any form to the capitalist class, and we demand that every vote be counted.
Thanks, Nick. We'll give Gary and Ann a final 2 minutes if they want to take it, and I will make some wrap-up remarks, and we will be prepared to go to the streets tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. Ann?
I don't know that I have that much more to say, just we really need to join in united fronts and mass action, independent mass actions with people who at one point we might not have agreed with their connection with the Democratic Party, but they're going to be moving more and more to us, and working in United Fronts can help facilitate that.
Thanks, Ann. And Gary?
Oh, I'll have to think about what I see unfolding. I don't know what the conditions of life are for working people, that they still have illusions in Trump. He's a cheerleader for things that I don't think could possibly, improve their economic lives. Biden, I think he promises that, but we know he doesn't deliver. And maybe people are smart enough to see through that. We're gonna see what happens now with a stimulus for the economy, and we'll see how stupid Trump gets with the COVID response. It is rather amazing that people wouldn't vote against him just on that basis. With the numbers increasing like they are, kind of like the saying, the environment or Mother Nature bats last. It's real playing with fire, and I'm surprised the voices that at least get that issue right, aren't doing a little better. Rather strange.
Gary, I want to thank you, and let me make some closing remarks. I'm not conceding defeat as the presidential candidate. I consider that we won this election. We won the election and that we traveled across the country. Before COVID-19, we visited Duluth, Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We were in Maine and Kentucky and New York City and all over California. Then we had an incredible web presence. I was interviewed by the Atlantic Monthly, a prominent newspaper, by Vice TV, by various international currents that were socialists in Colombia, Latin America, in Wales, in Ireland, in England, by various newspapers and publications and talk shows, and we made our voice known. We say this, Socialist Action is the party of mass action. We have for decades been central to the leadership of the fight to free America's most prominent innocent political prisoner, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who has supported our campaign. Alice Walker, the prominent novelist, is one of our campaign endorsers. Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Report is a campaign endorser, and many other people prominent in public life, like Mike Smith, who runs WBAI in New York radio show Law and Disorder. Hundreds of people have signed up for our campaign. We are the party that helped founded the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, which has organized demonstrations of 300,000 people demanding US troops be withdrawn from everywhere, including Iraq and Syria. We are leaders of the National Committee to Defend Julian Assange, one of the most prominent political prisoners in the country. We're active in the defense of Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. We defend women's rights wherever they're under attack. We organized a demonstration on the climate crisis of 10,000 people in the Bay Area. In other words, wherever there are people in struggle, wherever people want to come together and fight over specific issues, Socialist Action's there. We've recruited new people in the Nashville, Tennessee area, in the Atlanta, Georgia area, in Maine, and in Texas, and basically everywhere across the country where people are interested in ideas. They're joining our party. They understand that the fundamental problem is capitalism, and it cannot be defeated by a handful of people screaming from the mountaintops about the injustice of capitalism. It can only be defeated by millions of people screaming from the mountaintops and in every city and workplace in the country, demanding the abolition of this system. We're bold enough to believe that we can do it, that working people will fight for their own interests. I can understand something about Trump. The American capitalists have found that it's cheaper to, with their profit rates under attack, to send jobs everywhere in the world. Why pay union wages in the United States when you can have a Chinese worker, in the past, a dormitory teenage woman working for 6 cents an hour in an American-owned factory in China? Today, there are 40 million Chinese who earn less than $5 a day. Why not hire them rather than an American worker? Or Mexican workers, or Latin American workers, or Haitian workers who could be had for 19 cents an hour. So jobs have been offshored because it is more profitable, or workers have been replaced by robots because it is more profitable. And along comes Trump running against the entire establishment, especially Hillary Clinton, who was a warmongering Secretary of State and part of the Washington swamp. When along comes Trump and says, I'll bring your jobs home. His opinion poll experts said that the majority of American people are against foreign wars. So he says, I'm against foreign wars. And this lying bigot literally said, why wasn't I nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, for Pete's sake? Because he claimed to remove troops from Afghanistan. Instead, he replaced them, like Obama before him, with privatized death squad armies. The same thing with every issue. He says, I'm not for climate change. There it doesn't exist, because he wants to defend the oil industries, but he does it in the name of defending jobs in the oil industry, in opposing abolition of coal-fired plants, and expanding offshore drilling. So he's a clever, lying, cheating, racist, bigot politician who is appealing to American workers at a time when the Democrats for 8 years have overseen the first depression, the Obama era, where they bailed out the corporations to the tune of trillions of dollars. And when both parties bail out the same corporations with $1.3 trillion tax bills or $3.3 trillion bailouts, there's no difference. There's no one in the Democratic Party that organizes mass mobilizations of working people to fight the system, because the Democrats are the system. They defend the system. These are good times for us. A majority, if not 54% of young people under the age of 39 prefer socialism over capitalism. Those are the people that went into the streets, many of them, to stand with their Black and brown and Native American sisters and brothers. So we're a party of the united front, of mass action. We're not for peaceful actions because we're pacifists, but because at this stage, we're trying to break through the contradiction in people's minds that they are a minority. When they get into the street and see themselves together fighting for common causes, where they feel comfortable in attending rather than getting arrested and not being able to go to work the next day, that contradiction widens between what the masses believe and what the government delivers. We are not for violence, but we are for defending workers against the violence of the oppressor class. We lay the blame for violence in capitalist society on the system itself, the system of racism and mass incarceration and brutality to LGBTQI people, and deportation of immigrants, imprisonment of children in cages. This is the most violent system in the world, the system that has taken the lives of literally millions of people. The Afghan war has cost the lives of millions of people. Syria, 500,000 people are dead because of the US destruction of the infrastructure of that country and the fomenting of a war from almost the very beginning. The United States backed the right-wing coup in Egypt that maintained the heirs of the Mubarak dictatorship. The United States killed 80,000 people in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, is starving Venezuela. The United States is embargoing revolutionary Cuba, which is set the example of what the abolition of capitalism can mean for the people. Cuba has the finest healthcare system in the world. Cuba sends doctors around the world to help fight the coronavirus. Cuba has the lowest number, perhaps, in the world of people who have died. 135 people out of 11 million have died in Cuba because everybody has quality free healthcare, not to mention research institutions. So we're a pride party of revolutionary socialism. And we say revolutionary not to use a scary term, but to distinguish ourselves from those socialists who tragically support capitalism, who support Joe Biden, who support Bernie Sanders, who support the capitalist system, who are opposed to free quality health care for all, because it is necessary for everybody to come together to support a racist, bigot, warmonger like Joe Biden. You know, the New York Times said it best about Joe Biden. The best thing Biden could do is to stay out of the campaign, to let Trump stick his foot in his own mouth and Biden will be the recipient. So Biden says nothing about the key issues of the day. That's the central reason why he's not been able to mobilize any popular mass support. The fact that on the eve of the election, it's close, despite what all the polls said. It's close, which you turn on your TVs and watch with us. And it appears that it's going to come down to 3 states. And those are the 3 states that Trump threatened with not counting the mail-in ballots. With regard to those 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the vote won't be in till tomorrow or maybe even Friday. So Trump will argue and maybe try to use his Supreme Court majority to declare himself the president by not counting votes should he need them. This is absolutely a critical moment in history. However our criticism, whatever our criticisms of Democrats and Republicans, we are not going to stand up and say that the American people's right to vote, which was won by revolutionary means, however constricted, should be sacrificed. So we will stand with everyone demanding the right of the people to cast their votes for president of the United States, even though we don't support either candidate. The day that a dictator can walk in and abrogate the vote is the beginning of the road to hell for the American working class. It's the first step towards an open dictatorship, and we're against that. We're for democratic rights across the board for everyone, including and especially the revolutionary left, who the capitalists have banned from the airwaves. I didn't spend 1.3 or $13 billion on this election. When I tried a couple of years ago to get on the ballot and listing my party, they fined me $240,000 because I wanted Jeff Mackler, Socialist Action, to follow my name on the ballot in a statewide election for the US Senate. They persecute parties who try to exercise the democratic right to participate. It's largely a contest between billionaires, and anyone who tries to get into that is threatened with lawsuits and punishing fines by judges or court costs that basically make it impossible. We took the campaign to the people. We participated in the mass mobilizations. We are building an international revolutionary socialist movement. Our party is free from racism and sexism and homophobia and warmongers and capitalists of every sort. Join us. Be part of the future. Join us and make us a mass revolutionary party of the American working class and all the oppressed. Join us in building a working class party, a labor party based on fighting trade unions, not one that is led by compliant, docile, corrupt bureaucrats like Richard Trumka. Join Socialist Action. Check us out on our website, socialistaction.org. Make your contribution there. We have PayPal, and get in touch with us. And thank you so much, everybody, participants, Gary, John, Marty, Lisa, Nick, Ann, and last but not least, our long-winded Canadian comrade who owes us 5 minutes, Barry Weislater, Federal Secretary of the wonderful Canadian Socialist Action and our sister party. Thank you all for coming, and let's see you in the streets tomorrow. Thank you. And Nick will cut it off.
Good night,